Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a very interesting disassembly for you of this little guy right here. This is the Ratworx Chain-Drive Automatic knife. Yeah, that's its shtick here. When you press this button, this little chain is pulled back into the handle, which deploys the knife automatically. That makes this knife illegal in a bunch of places, and frankly, weird as heck. But it is very interesting, and today we're going to go ahead and take it apart. Now, full disclosure, I've actually disassembled this guy already. Anytime there's something really weird, I'll try and do my first disassembly off camera, just so I have a better sense, and so I'm not leading you guys down broken paths and whatnot. But, you know, actually, all things considered, this knife is pretty straightforward to disassemble. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at what's going on inside here, and yeah, there you go. So first off, I'm going to take out these two screws here. These are the pocket clip screws, and that's your pocket clip. Next thing what I'm going to do is going to go ahead and open the blade on this guy. That does mean that I'm disassembling it with the blade largely open, which is not something I'm super in love with, but at the same time, you know what, it does work. Next thing, I'm going to go ahead and undo the pivot here, and I'm using for this actually this little coin here. This is actually a hinderer pivot tool if you look at it closely enough, but practically speaking, it's a relatively soft, which is important. I don't want to scratch this guy up. This is a loaner, and I want to thank very much my buddy, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, for lending this little guy along. But he gave me full permission to do a disassembly, and so I'm going to go ahead and pop this open. One thing to note, though, is that this is actually a free spinning pivot, so you may need two flat, large bits in order to pop this guy open. You don't hear because I didn't use any thread locker or anything like that when I put it back together, but nonetheless. So now I can disassemble this little guy right here. And so we'll put the pivot down over here, and then finally I'm going to take out this last screw over here, which will then allow the knife to fully disassemble. So, practically speaking, this is an automatic knife. You should always use caution when disassembling an automatic knife because, well, automatics tend to have springs and whatnot, and those springs can either go flying or potentially, when you remove certain things, it can cause, like, blades to deploy and things like that. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do here is being very careful, and I'm stabilizing the blade with my hand here so that I know that no matter what else happens, the blade's not going anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and lift this off the top of this guy right here. And so I'm just going to kind of rock this section back and forth. You can see it's already starting to separate. And you can, in fact, see the little spring in there alongside the chain that's retracted into the handle here. And there we go. Needed to pop the button lock in a little bit in order for it to disengage. Now we're good to go. Now, with button locks, you always have to worry about the button going flying because there's a spring underneath this. What I'm going to do is, yeah, this guy's not super aggressive, but nonetheless. And now what we've got here is a fully disassembled knife, which is cool. Case closed, problem freaking solved. And it's actually a very clean, fully disassembled knife already. There's really nothing going on here, but I'll kind of show you how this thing works in practice from this perspective. So what you have here is an internal stop pin that goes inside this little half-moon shape. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit. Inside this little half-moon shaped track, there's an internal stop pin. It's mounted right here on this guy. And that prevents the blade from closing too far and banging into the back of the liner here, or opening too far and coming up in the back like that. And so that right there is sort of your level of control for the blade's travel. Then you've got this little chain guy that wraps around the back of the blade. And what happens is you've got this just coil spring here. It's just a pretty vanilla freaking spring. There's really not that much to this little spring here. And I need to get it into proper positioning here. There we go. And so what we can see is that when the knife is allowed to, basically, the blade will come all the way out here and open. And then when the knife folds up, what actually happens here is that this spring stretches out. I don't have it under spring tension for obvious reasons right now. And then the blade is here. And so there's a great deal of potential energy stored in this spring, such that when I undo the button lock, when I let the blade fly back out again, it'll come flying open like that. At the core, it's a really simple mechanism. I don't mean to downplay the innovation here. I don't mean to downplay any part of it, but it's at its core, it's not all that, you know, crazy or, weird. But it's a cool little idea there. And so, yeah, there we go. I'm just going to do a very, very slightest bit of cleaning. Mostly this is a demonstrative disassembly and maintenance because I've already coated everything with a nice thick layer of oil because you know me, right? And I'm actually using, for what it's worth, the 85 weight nano oil because it's not like this knife needs You know, it's an automatic with a big old freaking spring on it. It doesn't exactly need a really lightweight oil to run smoothly. And so, you know, practically speaking, the knife is clean, the knife is ready to go, and the knife is ready to disassemble here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put bearings back into position here. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that in there. We can see ceramic bearings, by the way, which is, you know, fine. Actually, this is, oh, here, let me zoom back out a little bit. This is a knife that honestly doesn't really even need bearings. Automatics tend to run fine on washes, and it's a little bit weird, honestly, that it is on bearings here, just because bearings tend to be, they're great for free swinging actions, but they're a little bit weird when it comes time to, you know, for, what am I trying to say here? They were a little bit weird for actions that don't need to free swing or anything like that. So, you know, it is what it is, though, whatever. And this is already a knife that's going to be uniquely vulnerable, I think, to sand and dust and gunk, because if it gets up inside this little track area here, then you're going to have yourself a bad time, because it's going to, you know, it won't be able to fully retract, etc. That'll be a problem, potentially. But, you know, as it stands, though, having bearings here, given there's already that vulnerability, not a huge deal. One thing that is going to be something that's, frankly, the hardest part of this knife disassembly and reassembly process is the button lock. Button locks are fine. They're a good system. One can't really get too bent out of shape about a button lock, yet at the same time, they can cause a little bit of difficulty during the reassembly. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to seat the spring inside this little area here. And I'm going to go ahead and fully close the knife. And my reason for doing that, is just so that the button lock can be fully kind of disengaged here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the button lock is, so what I've done here is I've seated this button lock hole onto this button lock spring on the inside there. Here, I'll zoom back in again. So you can see hole goes on spring. Spring goes in hole. There you go, case closed. Now when I close the knife, and here, I'll move this out of the way, the button lock is actually, you know, the blade is able to travel freely within there. And so that's an important thing, because it's locked up. A button lock is locked when it's fully vertical, like when it's in its raised position. But what you're going to want to do as you're putting things back together is make sure that the button lock is in that sort of partially deployed position where it's held in by the blade itself. So there's that. The next unpleasant thing here is that I have to have this spring wrapped around this little post, because that's how this works. If the spring isn't wrapped around the post, well, you got yourself a freaking problem, because the knife isn't going to deploy. It'll just be a free-swinging knife in general. You also need to keep the bearing in position. This is one of those knives that I feel like wants me to have 3 or 4 more hands than I actually do. So, what I'm going to do here is... there we go. Go ahead and use, I've kind of overextended the blade slightly here. So you can see the angle is all off here. And then, you know, so when I do this, you can see the spring is deploying. That's how the button, or that's how the automatic motion works. Extends, 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 and there you go. But anyways, what we're going to do here is actually lift the whole affair off slightly. So here... this goes here. So the button lock spring is inside the button lock button. Now I'm going to get that in there, so this is going to be where it's tricky. And it's not tricky in the sense of intellectually tricky, it's just a pain in the neck. Now what we have to do is get this side on here. And that involves 2 things. It involves getting the button lock through here without the button lock popping up and getting out of position. It involves not having this spring pop up, and I've fully lubricated these pads already, by the way. And it involves getting the stop pin seated inside the blade there. And right now I can't seat it naturally because the blade itself is not fully closed. So what I'm doing here is I've got some tension on this. I'm holding it down with my middle finger. Sorry about that, guys. I actually do like you. And now the button lock is being held down by the blade itself. The stop pin is exposed. The stop pin hole is exposed, that is. And my dream... hey, I did it. Holy crap, I did it. Cool. My dream is that that would happen, where I can just drop the stop pin in, the button lock will be in position, so I can pop it open and closed as I need to. And then what I'll do is I'll just flip this guy over, and then I'm going to use this little screw here, and I'm going to use a little bit of blue thread locker on this little guy to pop this shut. Like I said, I used a little bit of lubrication around the bearings there. I used a little bit of lubrication around the pivot overall, etc. And so this being in position should keep everything sorted together. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the back 2 screws because, you know, why not? And then I want to clean the pivot screw a little bit, but yeah. Okay, so there's that. This goes inside here. I got to say, I do like... With these nice deep hardware, I mean, seriously, look at these. These are nice deep Allen key hardware. This is among the better hardware I've seen on a knife lately, because it's not remotely proprietary. It's nice, it's deep, it's easy, it engages well with the screw. In this case, I don't mind at all having the clip hardware be the same as the holding the damn thing together hardware. So that's good. Now, finally, what we're going to do is I want to clean off this pivot a little bit. There's some kind of grayness on the bottom there, and I don't know whether that's old thread locker or what, but I'm just going to try and get in there and degunk a little bit here. It could actually just be like scale from some element or another of this process. And I'm just using a watch spring bar tool to get in here. I feel like that may be old thread locker that's just caked on. Yeah, that is. Ew. Sometimes when a company uses really, like, serious amounts of thread locker, you'll get this kind of caked on gunk in there, and it always bugs me. Look, I get it on a knife. Ah, you little bastard. I had a little piece of thread lock and gunk come flying up into my freaking mouth as I'm yammering on over here. Hashtag occupational hazards. There we go. But anyways, you know, I get it for a knife like this that, you know, I don't want to say it's not for the faint of heart to disassemble, because honestly, look, I expected this to be... The other day, I was on Gear Geeks Live with Tony Scullambrini. He's another gear reviewer, and we were talking about... The episode is called Tinkerbell, because the Spyderco Forums people called me Tinkerbell for taking everything apart, which is an honor I will wear with pride. But anyways, we were talking about disassembling knives, and he mentioned to me, oh, you know, the Ratworx Chain-Drive Automatic is like the final boss of disassembling knives. It's going to be so difficult, and really in practice it's not. I've had much more difficult disassemblies out of much more boring knives. Button locks are a little tricky, but practically speaking this was just not so bad. Yeah, there we go. See, that's a lot freaking cleaner. Although working in a puddle of rubbing alcohol will instantly remind you of any cuts you happen to have on your fingers, which is good. Thank you, rubbing alcohol, for your kind consideration. Okay, so now that we've got that on there, we can just put the pivot back into position here. And I'm going to use just a little bit of thread locker on this guy. Just a little tiny bit. See? Right there. Little bittiest freaking bit. And we drop this into position here. Now what we're going to want to do is just tighten down the pivot to an acceptable amount. And I'm just going to try and use the one side here, because now that whatever thread locker was in there was broken, everything is, you know, spinning nicely. Beautiful. Okay, that's sufficiently tight, I believe. Now we're going to check a little bit of blade play. So I'm going to tighten it up a little bit further here. And I'm just holding the other side here. Beautiful. No blade play. Centered perfectly. Smooth deployment. Yeah, and then this part is going to get gunk on it. Sooner or later, you're probably going to want to clean off the chain. This is a time when you might want like an ultrasonic cleaner or something like that in your life. But for the most part, that was easy, straightforward, and we're good. Anyways, hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. And I really genuinely hope that if you take one of these guys apart, it's just as easy for you, and life is, well, life is pleasant. Anyways, have a good one, everybody. Bye now.